Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Politics in the Pub. My name is Howard Bell. I'm your chair for this evening. I take this opportunity of acknowledging the traditional owners of this. I take this opportunity to recognise the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past and present. The committee, when planning this particular term, wanted to include something about homelessness and social housing. This is a topic that has emerged for discussion here in this forum and on numerous occasions in other forums. The simple fact remains that we live in an Australia that has the national figure of 120,000 homeless people in one of the most affluent countries in the world. We have to do better. And the thing that everybody in this room has in common is we're determined that that will happen. One of the specific measures that needs to be looked at is the question of how policies, public policy, can assist in driving down that national figure of 120,000. It used to be 105,000 back in the 2006 census. But like a lot of runaway trains, this is yet another runaway train. I can't think of two better guest speakers to address this problem. It's my great pleasure firstly to introduce the Honourable and the wonderful David Meehan. He's the current member for the Entrance in the New South Wales Parliament, and he represents me and my fellow residents of the Central Coast area, and he does it sensationally well. I just look forward to the day when he's the Premier of New South Wales, because I think he'll be a magnificent government leader. David has been the Labor member for the Entrance for some time now, and he's been a member of the Australian Labor Party since 1989. He has chaired and served as a board member with the Central Coast Tenants Advice and Advocacy Service for over 10 years. He has also served as the Secretary of the Central Coast Trades and Labour Council. Professionally, he's a science graduate of the University of Newcastle, and he also holds a master's degree in labour law from the University of Sydney. He has served as an advocate and officer with the National Union of Workers, New South Wales branch, and as an industrial inspector with the Department of Industrial Relations. To everything that he does, he brings strong advocacy for social justice. In his dealings with people on an individual basis, his dealings with an organisation on an organisational basis, he brings great strength to the social justice causes that are so important today and will be very important for the future. Everything that David does as a parliamentary representative and as a community advocate contributes to an enhancement of human rights in New South Wales. David, it's wonderful to have you here on board. Thank you so much for joining us here at Politics in the Pub. Professor Peter Phibbs is an urban planner with an international reputation in the area of housing studies. He's been the Associate Dean of the academic staff in the Faculty of Architecture at the University of Sydney. His research over many years has included the non-shelter outcomes of housing and the broad area of affordable housing. Professor Phibbs moved a very significant number of people at a gathering at Unions New South Wales recently when social housing was being discussed. It was convened by Shelter New South Wales and in particular Mary Perkins, who's been a regular guest here at Politics in the Pub. Peter has supervised 14 PhD completions and 5 Masters by Research. He himself holds a PhD in Regional Economics from the University of New South Wales. In addition to appointments at various universities, he's the chair of the Urban and Regional Planning Committee and the director of the Henry Halloran Trust at Sydney University. He's widely published and, as I indicated before, a leading light in the day-to-day work of both Shelter New South Wales and Homeless New South Wales. Peter, thank you for once again joining us. Please join me in welcoming both of our guest speakers this evening.
Okay, no, thanks very much, and it's wonderful to be here back at Politics in the Pub. We actually had a festival at the University of Sydney called the Festival of Urbanism that some of you might have had a chance to go to, and we actually, it wasn't in a pub, but we had a event in a wine bar in Redfern called The Game of Homes, which was describing the farce that the Sydney housing market has become, and what a sad outcome that is, particularly for many younger people. And we had a rowdy discussion with a group of students and others about the problems for young people about getting into the housing market. Now, addressing the topic tonight, what do we think about conservative governments and the issue of social justice and affordable housing? I want to recount to you a story. Now, when I was younger, and that was a while ago, but when I was younger, I was actually invited to go on an affordable housing task force of the minister. It was the Minister for Planning. It was a gentleman named Brad Hazzard, who I'm sure David has got to know. And I was pretty excited, academic. Yeah, we get stuck at uni a bit, you like to get out. So got invited to this task force, and I thought that's pretty good. We'll get on, we'll do stuff. We'll help solve affordable housing. Now my basic premise of being a affordable housing researcher for a very long time is I actually told one of David's colleagues this, the shadow minister for, shadow spokesperson for planning, Michael Daly. I said I could probably fix affordable housing if you gave me 3 days in New South Wales Parliament in a majority. It wouldn't actually take that long. People pretend it's some incredible wicked problem. You've just got to have a little bit of an interest in doing something about it. And I've taken that view after participating in the Affordable Housing Task Force, that I thought was an attempt by government to do something about an important problem. And Brad Hazzard's speech at the first meeting of that almost brought me to tears. He did seem very sincere. He talked about it as Sydney's biggest problem. It was a problem for old people, for young people. The government was going to do something about it. And essentially I discovered, and I think that actual task force met for 2 years. Well, met wasn't quite the word. We had fairly irregular meetings, but we were supposedly convened for 2 years. Every time we wanted to do anything, the minister's office would have, apoplexy. They would actually say something negative about the government or the housing situation, and we went round in what I describe as a very large circle. Now, one of the things about those things is I suspect I might have signed something saying I shouldn't say anything what happened in the task force, but I just found it incredibly amusing that people were talking about evidence and trying to make a difference, and essentially I think people just wanted an excuse, and it was like, yes, Minister, to say, we're so concerned about affordable housing, we've got a task force that's actually meeting almost as we speak, but the task force's job was essentially, I think government covered. It looked like, they were busy and nothing actually happened. And a colleague of mine, one of the things we do, we write academic papers. That's sort of our job these days. And my colleague Nicole Gurran, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, we wrote a paper almost about the task force experience, which we describe conservative politicians and affordable housing. Their main role is to look busy and to do nothing. And that, I think, summarises, possibly the political, I wouldn't say the political career of Brad Hazzard. I think he's made some contributions. But, the impact we made on affordable housing, we probably all should have gone out and, either built a house or donated our chocolate biscuit fees to Homelessness New South Wales, and they might have done something useful. That's all I could say about that whole process. Was they had excellent chocolate biscuits. I was much slimmer before I joined the task force. But I think the problem is you really need to look at the affordable housing issue from a social justice perspective. And I just think the Conservative governments in Australia have had a large problem with that. John Howard actually put his finger on it. He was quite truthful about it. He said, no one has come up to me and complained about their house going up in value. And I just think they've been playing the politics of it. People, 2/3 of people, or less than that now, but certainly more than half of people are homeowners. The value's been going up. They think that's good politics. They've been trying to pretend they're interested in the issue, and they've been essentially, I think, cheering the price up. And there's no greater example of that than the recent federal election, where there was, for once, quite a sharp choice between the two major parties in terms of their position on housing and housing prices. And the best the Conservative government could do was essentially run a bit of a scare campaign around negative gearing. I think we're really reaching a crossroads in this space. It's been a slow burning problem, affordable housing, but we're now starting to see, if you like, we're starting to reap what we've sowed. Essentially, as a researcher, and I used this quote during the Olympics, so you have to excuse me, but if there was an Olympic event for governments actually actively working to make housing more expensive, Australian governments would probably win the gold medal at every Olympics they entered in that event. It's basically been a fairly deliberate strategy. You have a tax system that just encourages investors. The only time those investors really get into the market is when prices are going up. So you just have this boom mentality. More than half the people, certainly in the finance part of the sector in the market are now investors. They've been assisted by very generous negative gearing concessions and a discount on the capital gains tax. And when you look at really the strong price escalation in the market in Sydney and Australia, it's really happened since the year 2000. The capital gains tax discount came in 1999. So the combination of those two policies has basically just provided a platform for investors to run hard at the market when prices start to increase. So we've seen, in Sydney, other capitals where we've had double-digit home price inflation for a number of years. Now, unfortunately, as I said, people pretend that's a problem. I suspect they think it's probably pretty good. They're in the housing market. The best Malcolm Turnbull could say was, well, people should actually, fork out money and help their children. That's probably okay if you're a multimillionaire. If you're battling along in Sydney, your ability to help your children, yet alone yourself, could be, very constrained, not to mention, prices up the entrance. So I actually think there's probably three reasons why Conservative governments are really bad at doing anything about affordable housing. Well, probably four reasons. One, they've got some religious belief in the market. They think the market's actually going to solve the problem. I had a bit of a role in an article that turned up in the Herald a few weeks ago where we actually drew the house price growth in Sydney and the increase in housing supply. They were following each other up. There was a positive correlation or association between those two values. So it's pretty clear that housing supply alone's not going to help in Sydney, even though it's certainly been a mantra of Conservative politicians. It's just a matter of letting the market rip. The market doesn't seem to be solving the problem. Things are getting worse despite the fact that we've doubled housing supply in Sydney over the last 4 years. At the same time, we've had a substantial increase in price. The other problem, as I mentioned, is they just figure people that vote for them like the fact that house prices are going up, so they're quite happy about that outcome. A lot of Liberal voters are homeowners. They're thinking they're probably going up to their local member and thanking them for everything that they've done. I think the sleeper, certainly in state politics, is this wonderful thing called stamp duty. Now, when the stamp duty rates were set were last changed in Sydney, other than the stamp duty for foreigners, was sometime in the 80s when a median house price in Blacktown was $44,000. Now, all that's happened in the intervening time is as house prices have increased, the take from government from stamp duty has just gone up and up. So now, at the moment, stamp duty revenues are the main revenue stream of the New South Wales government. So there's someone in a very bad suit, usually a dark suit with a white shirt, who you think is an estate agent at an auction in Sydney. They're actually someone from the New South Wales Office of State Revenue. And in a successful auction, a lot of times they're collecting $100,000 or more for more expensive properties, and that money's going into state coffers. Now, when you've got a revenue stream like that, it's very hard, I think, for Conservative governments to wean themselves off that revenue stream. They're pretending that they're economic geniuses because they're running a surplus. They're running a surplus essentially because of expensive housing in Sydney, and I think that's just very difficult for them to give it up. I think the other issue is, for a lot of the members of the Conservative parties, they're well represented in property lobby groups and the property industry. So the property industry's done pretty well out of the housing boom. I don't think it's any coincidence that Scott Morrison was railing against changing negative gearing provisions when he used to be CEO of the Property Council. So I think there's an association there, and my colleague and I, Nicole Gutton, have written a little bit about that in the conversation you might like to look at. I think, okay, that all sounds pretty depressing. I actually think the positive side of it, even though it's probably not a positive for people living the experience, I just think the way the market's operating, we're seeing some fundamental political change. I've been teaching young people for a long time. My students are master's students. They're, in their mid-20s, sometimes older. I've never seen people angrier about an issue, with the possible exception of lockout laws for some students, but they are so angry about being locked out of the Sydney housing market. Let me tell you a story about one of my students who I was describing a house price graph showing how house prices have gone up, and I turn around and this student starts swearing at me, and he called me a bleep, 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 bleep baby boomer. There was a lot of swear words in there. And I was the guy that had actually blip, 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 blip the housing market. That meant, despite the fact he had quite a good job, he had no chance of owning a house in Sydney. He was so angry, he kept swearing at me for about 10 minutes. He's a student enrolled in my class. I actually had to point out to him, for, I think was responsible on my part, point out I was marking his assignments. And despite the fact he'd paid money to do the course, if I really, really, really hated the fact he was been swearing at me for 10 minutes, that could possibly jeopardise his future as an urban planner. And the thing is, that made no difference. He swore more at me after I said that. I thought it would help. It didn't. And to his credit, he did come and apologise to me later. But for him, it was such a push-button issue. And I actually think there's an interesting political alliance developing between, baby boomers like myself who have managed to squirrel a bit of a way. I'm hoping to actually have a retirement where I can do some, have a bit of fun. And my children's idea of, me having fun is giving them large amounts of money so they can get into the Sydney housing market. Now, I don't think that's going to work all that well for me. And I suspect for some of my peers in the baby boomer group, not that you wouldn't want to help your children, but I think there's an interesting political alliance developing between cranky young people and very nervous baby boomers who want to see their money, their retirement savings, to be spent on European holidays and not on buying a fairly crappy apartment in somewhere to say your children got somewhere to live. And the other thing that really scares baby boomers, probably even more than that, is the fact we've now got boomerang children that mysteriously keep coming back to your house. And my favourite entire ad on TV was that ad where they turned their kid's bedroom into a bathroom. Remember that? The kid goes back to their bedroom and there's now a bathroom. So the kid had nowhere to sleep. But it is funny, but also tragic because I think Mr. Bowen in a speech yesterday was reported in the Herald today, just talked about the dilemma of a rich country like Australia not being able to house its own children. So for the first time, the next generation looks like they're really going to be worse off than us. And that change is happening quite quickly. So when you look at the total number of homeowners in Australia, the change isn't so great. When you look at it by age groups, we've had substantial decreases in home ownership rates. And I'm not saying, they're the only group we should worry about, but they're the canary in the coal mine showing what that problem is. So, we've got a situation where more and more people are spending much more of their income in housing. There's almost no affordable rental housing left in large parts of Sydney. People are, just doing it tough. And, if we simply leave it to Conservative governments, we're just going to end up with a position where people have task forces, working parties, they give sincere speeches, but seriously, I don't think they really give much of a hoot about the problem. And I think we're just going to have a situation where young people, older people are just really struggling in housing markets that just seems so bizarre in a city that's generated so much wealth out of the housing market. People are making a monster. Developers are coming out of nursing homes trying to do one more project because the money's so good at the moment. So you'd sort of think, given all that cash, we could construct a system where we could subsidise people that need help. We could work out ways of making housing more affordable. Seriously, I could do it in 10 minutes. People pretend it's a tricky problem. It is seriously not. It's about redistribution. It's about taxing profits. It's about taxing uplift. And it's about sharing the wealth in the housing market rather than letting, a small group of people shovel it away. Anyway, look, I'll stop there. I'm sure you'll have some good questions later. David's really raring to go, and it's such a pleasure to share a platform with someone who's got a master's degree from the University of Sydney. Now, did you swear at your lecturers at all during you didn't, probably? You're very polite. See, that's what we like to see. So anyway,